Welcome. Tonight, we'll step softly into a world where stories drift like mist through old courtyards, where candlelight flickers against wooden screens, and where memories linger far longer than flesh and bone. This is a story of patience, of waiting, and of the delicate boundary between the living and the dead, a tale inspired by the rich tradition of Giguai, Chinese strange tales. But do not worry, there are no sudden frights here, only quiet footsteps, long-forgotten songs, and the hush of time gently folding in on itself. You may find, as many scholars once did, that the line between dream and waking blurs when you're alone in an old house, listening to the wind. Tonight's journey will take us through 4 stories, each linked by the presence of the unseen, and the very human longing to be remembered. We'll begin with a place, a crumbling pavilion on the edge of memory, a place where, it's said, something, or someone, still waits. So settle in, let the world quiet around you, and imagine yourself walking slowly toward an abandoned garden. In the stillness just before dusk, imagine you are traveling through the countryside of southern China. The path is narrow and overgrown. The summer heat presses gently on your shoulders. Just off the road, partially hidden by willows, is a small stone archway. Time has worn away the characters carved into its surface, but you can just make out a name: Yunlu. The Pavilion of Mist. Local villagers avoid it. They say it's unlucky that music plays there when no one is near. But you are tired and curious, and so you step quietly through the arch. The air cools. A breeze brushes your face, faintly scented with plum blossoms, though the trees are long dead. Ahead, the pavilion tilts slightly, its wooden beams bowed under the weight of forgotten seasons. You sit. The silence wraps around you like a thin blanket. And then, just barely, you hear it, a song, faint, almost imagined, a woman's voice, slow, mournful, echoing as though sung across centuries. You glance around, but there is no one, just the empty pavilion, and a single candle, somehow burning on the sill. It flickers, as if stirred by breath. Long ago, this place was different, built during the late Tang dynasty. It once stood at the edge of a private garden, part of a wealthy magistrate's estate. His daughter, Linyu, was said to be quiet and gentle, always carrying a book of poems, often seen beneath the wisteria one summer. As the story goes, a young scholar named Shen arrived, seeking lodging and shade. They met only briefly, a glance, a borrowed poem, a soft laugh in the garden. But what followed was a quiet devotion, a longing that neither time nor distance would lessen. Shen was called away before autumn. Promises were made, letters exchanged. But then, silence, war, came. The estate was abandoned. The garden burned. No one saw Linyu again, but the pavilion, it remained. And from time to time, those who wandered near claimed they heard a woman singing softly, waiting for someone who never returned. There are many stories like this, pavilions, temples, and courtyards scattered across China where something lingers. But what's most curious is not the ghost itself. It's how calmly these stories are told. No screaming, no chase, just a quiet presence. A sense of being watched, gently, patiently, as though someone is hoping you'll sit down and stay a while. Ghosts in these tales are not monsters. They are reminders, echoes of people who once walked the same stones, wore the same silk robes, looked at the same moon through the branches. Sometimes they are simply waiting for a final word, or for someone to remember their name. And in that way, they are not so different from the living. Imagine now, a modest scholar's room, tucked away behind tall garden walls. Outside, the plum trees are just beginning to bud. Inside, everything is still. You hear the soft creak of bamboo blinds, the steady scratching of a brush across paper, and the faint rustle of wind. The man at the desk is alone. He has always been alone. His name is Zhu, a minor scholar in the waning days of the Ming dynasty. He lives quietly, teaching calligraphy, copying old poems, and making tea with slow precision. The neighbors say he speaks little, smiles less, but sometimes, when the light catches just right, they see him gazing at something on his wall, a scroll, a painting. He found it one spring morning, at a dusty market stall near Suzhou's city wall. The merchant barely looked at it, just an old ink painting, faded, delicate, a woman seated in a courtyard, robes flowing like mist, head slightly bowed, but Zhu, something about her expression, the half-turn of her body, the way her eyes didn't meet his, and yet seemed to see him anyway. He felt something stir. He bought it without haggling. He hung it in his study, and then he began to speak to her, softly. At first, idle thoughts, phrases from poems, little remarks about the weather, but soon, longer conversations, questions, confessions, ideas he never dared share with the living. In her silent company, his solitude no longer felt so empty. And then, one evening, something changed. He returned home after a lecture, and found the scroll unfurled, though he'd carefully rolled it up before leaving. Woman's eyes, they seemed brighter. A breeze moved through the room. Though the windows were closed, he lit a candle, and for just a moment, he swore he saw her blink. This is a familiar tale in the world of Jaguai. Love stories that cross the border between worlds, between the living and the dead, the real and the imagined. In some versions, the woman steps out of the painting. In others, the scholar fades into it. But what's consistent is the tone, gentle, melancholic, and unhurried. No one is punished. There is no sharp terror, just longing, and the quiet collapse of distance. What's particularly interesting in these tales is not the supernatural, but the way the supernatural is treated. The painted woman is not feared. She is not questioned. She is simply accepted, as though her presence were part of the natural order. Ju does not seek to banish her. He does not investigate her origins. Instead, he adapts. He leaves her tea in the mornings, lights incense, recites poems as offerings. It's not about control or proof. It's about relationship, even if one side never speaks. In the end, the story fades like mist. Some versions say Ju disappeared. Others say he died quietly, the scroll still hanging beside his desk. But the painting, it was never found. And to this day, old scrolls tucked in antique shops may hold more than just ink. You may pass by one and feel watched, but if you stop and listen, you might hear something, a voice without breath, or just the soft rustle of robes. Now, we turn from story to ritual, from the personal to the collective. Imagine yourself, now, standing just before dawn. The sky is still dark, but the village is beginning to stir. Quiet footsteps pad through the courtyard. A boy carries jost sticks, their tips glowing faintly. An older woman follows, cradling a bowl of rice. Another carries folded paper, thin fluttering gold and silver squares. They are preparing for the dead. It is the ghost festival, and in ancient China, ghosts were not merely stories. They were responsibilities. Unlike the vengeful, shrieking phantoms of some Western folklore, Chinese ghosts were most often seen as ancestors, or at least once human. They had names, they had needs, and if their needs went unmet, they became restless. This belief wasn't grounded in fantasy. It was structured, methodical, almost bureaucratic. Imagine this, a family in the Eastern Han Dynasty, more than 1,800 years ago. On the 7th month of the lunar calendar, they prepare an altar, food, incense, paper, clothing, lanterns lit to guide wandering souls. The dead, they believed, were given brief reprieve, allowed to visit the realm of the living. And they must be welcomed, not feared, not fled from, but honored, fed, given light, warmth, and company. This wasn't merely superstition. It was woven into law, custom, and social duty. Families were judged on how well they tended ancestral graves. Neglecting tombs could bring shame, even misfortune. If your harvest failed, or illness came, it might be said the ancestors were displeased, and so ritual became routine. Just as crops needed tending, so too did the dead. At the core of these practices was a striking idea that the boundary between life and death was porous, not absolute. In the Yahang Zazu, a Thames Dynasty collection of strange stories, there are countless tales of officials in the underworld, judges, scribes, even clerks, managing vast registers of the dead. Death, it seemed, was not an end. It was a reorganization. Your soul, they believed, might be misfiled, sent to the wrong realm, or stuck in limbo, a hungry ghost, mouth thin as a needle's eye unable to swallow, forever yearning. Such beings were to be pitied, not punished, and so offerings were made, not just to ancestors, but to the forgotten, the orphaned dead, the ones with no names left behind. Their paper homes were burned into ash, their rice bowls left full, untouched, so that, just maybe, they might feel full for a night. In this way, ghosts became part of daily life. You might see a flicker of movement in a mirror, or hear your name whispered on a quiet breeze. But you would not scream. You would bow. You would leave a light on. And tomorrow, at dawn, you would burn incense. Just in case. It's a very different kind of ghost story, not meant to frighten, but to connect, to remind the living that they are not alone, that time is a thread, and the dead still listen. Even now, as we move onward, the sound of ritual drums fades behind us. The lanterns drift, their glow dimming. We step now into a quieter realm, not haunted by ghosts, but by thoughts. A single hut in the mountains. A scholar, a pot of tea. And silence, so deep you can hear the paper breathe. Yourself waking up before dawn. The ground beneath you is hard, uneven. Your robes are damp with dew. Somewhere nearby, a small fire smolders low, giving off a gentle hiss as it struggles against the morning air. You sit up, rubbing your eyes, your legs still aching from yesterday's climb. Ahead lies another mountain, another long day of walking, of begging for food, of dodging demons, and there he is, perched casually on a boulder, munching loudly on a peach he probably stole from some unfortunate orchard. Is Sun Wukong, the Monkey King. He's been up for hours. You can tell he doesn't sleep much. Immortal creatures rarely do. But he's been growing impatient. Again his golden-banded staff rests lazily across his shoulders. He yawns loud and unashamed, and flicks the peach pit over your head. You humans are so slow, he mutters, picking at his teeth with a bamboo sliver. We could be at Thunderclap Monastery by now, if you'd just let me fly us there. You sigh. You've had this argument before. Again. The grind of the road. The journey to the west is often painted as an epic adventure, filled with magic, monsters, and heroic transformations. But most of it was just walking, endless walking, muddy paths, slick with rain, steep hills baking under sun, forests where no path exists at all. The group, consisting of the monk, Tang Sanzang, Monkey King's son, Wukong, gluttonous Pigsy, and the stoic but sullen Sandy, spent 14 years on the road. If we trust the literary retellings, the real journey may have taken even longer, and you're along for the ride, a lesser disciple, perhaps, or maybe a random pilgrim roped into the effort. Either way, you're walking on sore feet, hoping the next village has a temple generous enough to spare a few bowls of rice. Meals are not guaranteed. Accommodation sparse, usually outdoors, occasionally a monastery floor. Often just dirt beneath a patch of stars. And then there are the demons. The demon problem every few days or so it seems. You're attacked, not by armies or bandits, but by spirits, illusions, shapeshifters, all with one goal, to devour your master. The monk. His flesh, according to the legends, is imbued with purity so great, it grants immortality to any who consume it. So, hungry demons abound. Some are clever. Some disguise themselves as widows, or crying children, or kindly old men. Others are brute beasts, teeth, claws, and hunger. And when this happens, the Monkey King fights, but not always calmly. Sun Wukong is known for his explosive temper. He tends to act first, ask questions later. Occasionally, he kills innocent people, or at least people who seemed innocent. Sometimes the monk scolds him. Sometimes the group falls into bitter silence. You walk on in that silence, mud sucking at your shoes. You're tired, hungry, nervous, and the Monkey King is muttering again. Traveling with a god who isn't always helpful now. You might think it's useful to have a powerful being by your side, and it is, occasionally. But Sun Wukong is difficult. He is arrogant, mischievous, restless. He grew up in chaos, born from stone, trained by Taoist immortals, and imprisoned under a mountain for 500 years. Now reformed, he has a hair-trigger temper and 1,000 grudges. He can fly, he can shrink, he can summon storms, but he often chooses not to, out of spite or pride, or because he simply wants to watch others struggle. He bickers constantly with Pigsy, whose main concerns are food and flirting. Sandy, the river ogre, rarely speaks, but when he does, it's often to remind you all just how far from home you are. And the monk, he prays. Softly, endlessly, hoping for peace, even when surrounded by quarrels. The smell of the road. You grow used to the smells: sweat, unwashed robes, wet sandals, occasionally blood, though no one talks about that for long. You grow used to the rhythm, the rising sun, the aching legs, the mid-afternoon scavenge for food, the hushed conversation around camp. You begin to dream about hot tea, about a bed, about a room with walls and no spirits hiding behind them. But the journey continues, because it must. The scrolls must be fetched. The truth must be reached. The path, it is said, is part of the Enlightenment, even if your companion is a talking monkey who keeps stealing your rice balls, even if you're not sure you'll make it another day. And so, you walk. Because in this story, everyone is walking towards something sacred, or away from something forgotten. Before the Monkey King danced through the pages of Ming Dynasty fiction. Before Pigsy cracked jokes and Sandy sulked quietly at the rear. There was simply a man, a monk, quiet, determined, tired. His name was Xuanzang, and unlike his mythical companions, Xuanzang was very much real. Let us step into his sandals for a time, not of silk or magic cloud, but the rough leather of a pilgrim, whose feet bled from the long road west. A man of question. Xuanzang was born in the year 602, in what is now Henan province, China, during the late Sui dynasty. It was a turbulent time, marked by rebellion, famine, and regime change. By the age of 13, he had entered the Buddhist monastic life, a common choice for those seeking order amidst chaos. But even as a young monk, Xuanzang was unsettled, not by his vows, but by the inconsistencies in Buddhist scripture. Different monasteries taught different doctrines, translations conflicted, questions went unanswered. And so a thought took root, gentle but persistent. If the truth could not be found in China, perhaps it waited farther west, at its source. That source was India, the cradle of Buddhism, a distant land of sacred texts, of ancient teachers, of subtle truths that had grown faint across centuries and translations. And so, in 627 CE, Xuanzang left, quietly, illegally, without imperial permission. He would not return for 17 years. The road to India. Xuanzang's journey was not one of epic battles, not of magic, but of endurance. He crossed deserts, the Taklamakan, a place the locals called the Sea of Death, wind-swept dunes where sandstorms could erase a path in minutes, and water was a rare and precious weight. He climbed mountains, the snow-choked passes of the Hindu Kush, thin of air and sharp of stone. There were no guides, no guard of immortals, only the rhythm of steps and the murmur of prayers carried on the wind. He endured, often sick, often alone, often misunderstood, and yet he was received with surprising respect. In the Buddhist kingdoms of Central Asia and Northern India, Xuanzang's knowledge was prized. He debated local scholars, transcribed texts, and most notably, he studied at Nalanda University, a great center of learning. There, under the guidance of master teachers, he finally found the clarity he sought. He learned the Yogbikra school of philosophy. He copied sutras by hand. He listened. He wrote. He listened more and slowly. The confusion that had plagued him began to lift. The return. A library on the back of a horse in 645 CE. Xuanzang returned to China, but he did not come empty-handed. He brought over 600 texts. He brought statues, relics, notes, and a profound sense of mission. The emperor, now of the Tang dynasty, welcomed him with honor, a hero's return. But one Xuanzang received with humility. He would spend the rest of his life translating, page after page, sutra after sutra. He declined high office. He declined political favor. Instead, he created one of the most important translation teams in Chinese history, working for 19 years to render Indian texts into accessible Chinese, laying the foundation for future generations of Buddhist scholarship. That man becomes myth after his death in 664 CE. Xuanzang's legend began to grow. Stories emerged, embellishments, visions. In time, storytellers wrapped him in fantasy, surrounding the lonely monk with a talking monkey, a gluttonous pig, a loyal demon, and a dragon-turned horse. But at the heart of it all, still sat a man with a question, a man with a scroll, a man walking, endlessly walking, toward something unseen, not for glory, not for adventure, but for understanding. Gentle pause. And now, from the quiet folds of scripture and footsteps, we drift into stranger realms, into illusions and riddles, into demons who do not die and questions that refuse to be answered. Next, we'll look closely at one of the journey's most curious foes, a creature who returned again and again in ever-shifting form, not just a monster, but perhaps a mirror. Now, let your thoughts drift deeper past dusty monasteries and whispered sutras to a quiet forest path, the kind that looks safe until it TRS, sunlight filters through leaves. Somewhere, a bird calls out, high and soft, and ahead, a figure waits. She is smiling. She looks harmless, but she ascends. In the world of Journey to the West, she is known as Baggaging, or the white-boned demon, a shape-shifting spirit, graceful and terrible, who haunts a short but unforgettable stretch of the traveler's long path. But why does she return again and again, in different guises? Why does her story linger, even as others fade? Let's walk slowly through her tale, not in fear, but in curiosity. There is more to her than teeth and claw. The woman on the road. The story begins, as many do in the novel, with the monk, Xuanzang, leading his disciples through remote countryside. The road is quiet, the sky is clear. They are hungry, and then, as if by chance, a young village girl appears, carrying a tray of food. She is pale and soft-spoken, her eyes downcast. But the monkey king sees through it, with no hesitation. He strikes her down. The body vanishes, revealed to be a demon in disguise. Xuanzang is horrified, so is Pigsy, and so the group argues. But the next day, the girl returns, this time as an elderly mother. Again, Sun Wukong kills her. A third day passes. This time she returns as a frail old father, and again the monkey sees through her. Again he acts, and again she disappears in a puff of bone dust and wind. 3 guises, 3 attempts, all met with suspicion and violence. Eventually, the monk, fed up with the Monkey King's brutality, banishes him, and for a brief time, the demon seems to have won. But this story is not about winning. A demon, but not evil. On its surface, Baggaging is a simple villain, but her strange persistence, her calculated disguises, they invite deeper reflection. Why does she appear in familial roles? Why bring food? Why not attack openly? In many interpretations, Bagging is not just a threat, she is a test, a metaphor, a mirror for Xuanzang's Navit and Sun Wukong's instinct. She is a puzzle of perception about trust, doubt, and the cost of seeing clearly. In Chinese Buddhism, illusions are everywhere. Even kindness can be false. Even beauty can be a trap. Bagging uses that principle. She becomes what we expect, and asks, "Do you still see me?" The bone and the body. Her name, White Bone Demon, is literal and symbolic. In Buddhist funerary tradition, monks meditate on bones to confront the impermanence of the flesh, to remember that behind every lovely face is a skull. Bagging is that skull. She strips away illusion, not only of her own disguises, but of the traveler's assumptions. She forces us to ask, what do we believe because we want to? And when Wukong acts decisively, instinctively, he is punished, because truth, even when accurate, can appear cruel. This paradox runs throughout Journey to the West. Bagging is not a monster of brute force. She is a riddle, and then, she's gone after her third defeat. The white-boned demon vanishes from the narrative. She never returns. Other demons follow, other tests, but few as hauntingly ambiguous as her. In the long arc of the novel, her appearance is brief, yet strangely lingering. Perhaps it is because she reminds us that the journey isn't just about distance, it's about perception, about how easily our kindness blinds us. Or how often our sharpness is mistaken for cruelty. In a story filled with gods and monsters, flying staffs and exploding peaches, it is the silent persistence of a demon in disguise that often stays with us, not for the horror, but for the uncertainty. Slightly slower now, and so, as her last illusion fades into wind, we leave the darkened path. We leave the strange, lonely smiles of something pretending to be human, and drift upwards to the clouds, to palaces, not of stone, but vapor, where deities wear court robes, not armor. And immortals fill out reports. In our next and final segment, we'll climb into the heavenly bureaucracy, where gods attend meetings, and karma is managed by celestial administrators. a divine world that looks surprisingly familiar. Now, with the dust of the demon roads behind us, we ascend gently, steadily, into the clouds. Imagine yourself floating upward, past mountain peaks veiled in mist, beyond the cries of cranes and the soft roll of thunder, and then you arrive. It is not what you expected. No golden gates, no choirs, no all-powerful silence. Instead, a palace, columns of white jade. Ink, brushed ledgers stacked high on lacquered desks, attendants pacing hallways with scrolls tucked under their arms. You have entered the heavenly court, the sprawling, meticulous bureaucracy of Taoist and Chinese, Buddhist cosmology. Here, gods do not simply reign, they report, they file requests, they wait for approvals. This is the celestial world of the Jade Emperor, of heaven's divine administrators, and of immortals who work 9 to 5. Let us wander quietly through these divine corridors. A different kind of eternity awaits. Welcome to the celestial civil service. At the heart of heaven is the Jade Emperor, not a creator god, but a cosmic ruler. He governs through delegation. Like an emperor on earth, under him, an entire pantheon of gods, spirits, and immortals, each with specific titles and roles. There is a stellar registrar who manages star positions, a rain official who determines downpours. The god of the kitchen stove reports annually on a household's behavior, and of course, the Bureau of Reincarnation, managing the great ledger of souls. Everything is documented, filed, inspected. One god's job is to record every human birth. Another monitors dreams. A third oversees city walls and gate hinges. This divine order mirrors China's historical imperial bureaucracy, where civil service exams and Confucian hierarchy define society. The heavens, you see, are not wild. They are organized, deliberate, paper-filled. When gods misbehave, but even here, things go wrong. In Journey to the West, the Monkey King himself begins in heaven as a minor official. Appointed as the keeper of the heavenly stables, he quickly realizes it's a low-ranking post. An insult, he rebels, wreaks havoc, declares himself the great sage, equal to heaven. Eventually, he's imprisoned under a mountain for 500 years. But his revolt highlights something profound. Even in the divine realm, rank matters. Positions are earned, fought over, lost. Demons, too, seek official titles. In fact, many of the monsters the travelers face are disgraced former officials, or ambitious immortals who hope to rise by devouring a holy man. Promotion, you see, is everything. In heaven as on earth. Incense and performance reviews. So how are divine officials evaluated? Through prayer, through sacrifice, and most curiously, through incense quotas. Yes, many Taoist deities are said to draw strength from the volume and sincerity of incense offerings burned in their honor. Temples keep track. Spirit messengers observe attendance. If a god fails to attract worship, they may be demoted. A low-traffic shrine might be reassigned. A forgotten god might fade entirely in this way. Faith is bureaucratized, devotion measured like taxes, tracked like tribute. That there is something deeply human in this divine economy. A reminder that even immortals must stay relevant. Heavenly Files. Mortal reflections. You might wonder why I imagine such a structured heaven. Perhaps because structure brings comfort in a chaotic world. It is soothing to think that somewhere, behind the clouds, a ledger is balanced, that your good deeds are noted, that justice is slow, but not blind. Even punishment is meticulously scheduled. In Buddhist cosmology, the 10 kings of hell review every soul's record. They assign torments not as vengeance, but as correction, a kind of divine accounting. And after it all, rebirth, back into the mortal world, back into the long, winding road toward enlightenment. Ending the ascent. So the divine court remains orderly, eternal, slightly overstaffed. Its gods are neither all-powerful nor unknowable. They are like civil servants, diligent, flawed, and quietly indispensable. Perhaps it is no coincidence that the Monkey King, for all his chaos, eventually finds peace not in rebellion, but in service, in returning to the journey, to the road, to the monk, just as we return now, slowly, from the heights of cloud palaces to the soft rhythm of your breath. We'll rest here for just a little longer. Soon, we'll draw it all together in our quiet final reflections on this strange and beautiful journey. The journey never really ends, and now we've walked the length of a world, not quite ours, through muddy paths and chattering disputes, past golden mountains and hungry spirits, and even into the quiet corridors of heavenly offices. A journey alongside gods, demons, and one very noisy monkey. But now, here, in the hush of late hours, we can begin to let it all settle. Let's pause and look back softly and where we've been. A road paved with suffering and steadiness. The monk's journey to the west was more than mythical. It was long, cold, and sore on the feet. Imagine waking before dawn in a foreign land, feet blistered from yesterday's walk, rice stretched too thin. And yet, you rise again. You keep walking. You walk not because the path is easy, but because turning back is no longer an option. That quiet persistence, a calm, deliberate devotion is what turned a real monk's travels into a story that shaped centuries. And perhaps there is something restful in that kind of repetition. The Monkey King, as exhausting as he was, loyal Sun Wukong may have broken the heavens, but by journey's end, he bows his head, not because he is weaker, but because, in the quiet company of his companions, even a god learns humility. In his loudness, his vanity, and his strength, there is something very human, but his growth, his willingness to serve, to carry, to protect, is something far more rare, and it unfolds not in battle, but in small gestures, in everyday choices, in the quiet of the road, the white-bone demon. What we can't seem to let go. She was beautiful. She was false. She came back again and again. The white-bone spirit may have worn different shapes, but what she truly embodied was fear. The fear that what we see might deceive us. But her story also reminds us, we each carry illusions. We mistake appearances. We battle our own desires. And sometimes we kill what we do not understand. And still, the journey goes on. Heaven like an office. Perhaps that's not so bad in the end. The gods themselves sat at desks, signed orders, received performance reviews, and while that might sound terribly dull, there is comfort in that dullness. Order, process. Even in the afterlife, someone keeps the ledgers tidy. Perhaps, if the heavens are structured, then the world, even with its demons and storms, has its own quiet order. A final resters, we return now to our own rooms. 2 soft pillows and quiet shadows. Let this story linger not in your thoughts, but in your breath. The road has not truly ended. It never really does. Settle in now. Let the room grow quiet, and your thoughts grow soft. We're going on a journey, not across oceans or through timelines tonight, but through tales. Ancient ones whispered beneath the moon, or shared in low voices around a fading fire, somewhere between history and legend. Between the dust of kings and the brush of fur, we find fox spirits. Sometimes they appear as beautiful women, with smiles that flicker like candlelight. Other times, they linger in forest clearings, watching, clever, still, patient. The fox has always been more than just an animal in East Asian lore. It is memory, mischief, and mystery, all wrapped into one. It is desire and danger. It is the unspoken thought that maybe, just maybe, you're being watched by something not quite human. Tonight, we'll follow that trail. In our first segment, we'll step into the story of a person who meets a fox spirit, and not the dramatic, cinematic version, but the quiet, drawn-out courtship, the long silences, the hints that something isn't quite right. So, take a breath, close your eyes if you like, and imagine, just for a little while, you've met someone beautiful. They are kind, they are gentle, they say they love you, but some days, you find strange footprints near the door, and on others, you wake up, and they're just gone. Let us begin. Imagine, if you will, you live in a small mountain village, somewhere deep in the old lands of northern China. The roofs are tiled and slightly mossy. The nights are long. The air smells of pine smoke and wet earth. You are a scholar perhaps, a widower, or a merchant's daughter who has returned home from the city, someone with a quiet life, but also a little lonely. One evening, on a path between rice paddies, you meet a stranger, a woman with striking eyes, golden perhaps, and a voice like falling leaves. She says she is from another village. She is visiting relatives, she claims, but no one in your village remembers her family. Still, She is kind. You talk often. She leaves little gifts, handmade rice cakes, folded paper cranes. Time passes slowly. A season turns, and then one day, she disappears. No goodbye, no note. But you notice your chickens no longer come home. The village dogs grow anxious, and at night, outside your door, there are long, thin scratches in the dirt. This kind of tale, a man meets a woman who is more than she seems, appears again and again throughout East Asian folklore. In Chinese tradition, she's a huli jing, a fox spirit. In Japan, she's called a kitsune. In Korea, a gumiho. And she is almost always female, beautiful, soft-spoken, and eventually gone. Let's pause here and slow down, walking gently through how this figure lived in the imagination of so many over the centuries. These stories rarely begin with violence or fear. Instead, they begin with longing. A man misses his late wife. A scholar feels adrift. A young woman tends her fields, overlooked by the men in town. And then, a stranger arrives, elegant, mysterious, attentive in a way no one else is. Sometimes she heals you when you're sick. Sometimes she offers dreams filled with strange symbols. Sometimes she simply listens. But always, there's something slightly off. She never eats garlic. She avoids temples. She never seems to age. And when she vanishes, as she always does, she leaves behind just one thing, a single silver hair. These stories were not designed to shock. They were not ghost stories in the Western sense. Rather, they were cautionary tales about beauty that is too perfect, about intimacy that feels too sudden, about trusting things you cannot quite name. And not all fox spirits were malicious. Some were protectors. Others, lonely themselves, simply wanted companionship. There are stories of foxes who stay for years, helping raise children, tending gardens, weaving clothes. Only when discovered, they slip away, as though the knowledge of their true nature breaks the spell. In these tales, the fox spirit is never truly evil, nor is she entirely good. She is, instead, a mirror of our hopes, of our fears, of the blurry line between what we want to believe and what we know cannot be. So when you hear the rustle of leaves tonight, or a glimpse of flicker of movement out of the corner of your eye, perhaps don't follow. Foxes are clever, and some promises are best left unspoken. Now, with that quiet ache of mystery lingering just behind your thoughts, we'll turn toward another tale. This one, drawn from the grand halls of a collapsing dynasty. A fox with not just a lover to charm, but a king to ruin. Now let the forest of folklore give way to something grander. You're standing at the entrance to a vast palace. Its walls rise high above you, dark lacquered beams, tiled rooftops with golden inlays, and courtyards lined with perfectly combed gravel. Everything is still perfect, and terribly uneasy. You are in the final days of the Shang dynasty. It is the 11th century BCE. The court is beautiful, and deeply sick. In its center sits King Zhou of Shang, not to be confused with the later Zhou dynasty rules with power and confidence, but also with growing instability, and at his side is a woman. Her name is Doji. She is beautiful beyond compare, soft-spoken, graceful, poised, and she is, perhaps, not entirely human. The story of Doji is one of China's oldest and most enduring legends, told and retold for over 3,000 years. At its heart is a question: did a fox spirit bring down an empire? Let's slow our steps here. Doji was said to be the daughter of a noble family given to King Zhou as a consort after her clan was conquered. But somewhere between her arrival at court and the transformation of the king, stories begin to change. The legend says, a powerful fox spirit, a nine-tailed huli jing, saw an opportunity. She possessed the young woman's body, not in the dramatic fashion you might imagine. No spinning heads, no shrieking, just a quiet slipping in, like wind through a cracked window. From that moment on, the court began to darken. Doji charmed the king, not simply with her beauty, but with her attentiveness. She laughed at his jokes. She whispered ideas into his ear, ideas that pleased him and frightened his ministers. She asked for strange entertainments, dances that mimicked the cries of animals, towers that caught fire with imprisoned men inside, gardens made of meat, left to rot beneath the sun. The king obeyed, and the people watched confused, then horrified. But remember, this was not a time of newspapers or widespread writing. These stories filtered through whispers. One servant saw something strange. Another heard the king scream in the night. A third found footprints shaped like paws, not feet. Bit by bit, a picture formed, and so the tale grew, that the nine-tailed fox had come to destroy the dynasty from within. Historically, we know King Zhou was the last ruler of the Shang, and we know he fell. Whether Doji truly existed, and whether she was simply a scapegoat, remains uncertain. But fox spirits, after all, thrive in uncertainty. And there's another layer here. The fox is often a symbol of female agency, of the kind of influence that cannot be grasped or named, only feared. Doji, as legend has it, did not scheme with armies. She used silences, glances, ideas that seemed innocent, until they bloomed into nightmares. Whether she was a demon, a disgraced noblewoman, or simply the victim of a collapsing court's need for blame, her name lives on. Not as a general, not as a queen, but as a whisper, soft, persistent, and unsettling. And so the palace falls. The Shang are no more. The Zhou rise in their place, but fox spirits, they do not disappear with dynasties. They watch, they wait, and sometimes they return. Let us now step back from the candlelit halls of imperial intrigue. Our next chapter will not deal with courts or kings, but with the quiet presence of foxes among the living, in graveyards, shrines, and the rustle of wind in bamboo. Imagine yourself on a quiet path in rural Japan. The trail winds gently upward, bordered by moss-covered stones and flickering shadows. Ferns reach toward your legs, and the wind makes the trees speak in low, dry voices. You are far from the cities, far from the noise of the world. Ahead, half hidden behind bamboo and fog, sits a small wooden shrine. Its paint is faded, its roof slightly crooked, but on the steps leading up to the offering box, you see them, two carved foxes, worn smooth by decades of wind and rain. One fox holds a key in its mouth, the other a sacred jewel. These are kitsune, the Japanese counterpart of the huli jing, and they are not evil, not quite, but they are not safe either. This segment brings us into the soft folds of folklore and physical place. It's about where belief settles down and takes root. Let's begin with the fox as messenger. In Japan, foxes are sacred to the deity Inari, the kami of rice, agriculture, and prosperity. Not coincidentally, Inari is also associated with fertility, industry, and success in business. Foxes, as his messengers, became symbols of both bounty and mystery. Shrines dedicated to Inari often have fox statues at the gates or guarding the main hall. You may have seen photos of the Fushimi Inari Shrine near Kyoto. Thousands of vermilion torii gates leading up a mountainside, winding for miles like a dream. Scattered along those trails, tucked into shaded glades, are small fox altars, often holding offerings. But what, you may wonder, do people leave for a fox spirit? The answer is both humble and strangely touching. Boiled rice, pieces of fried tofu, known as a burich, sometimes sake, and on rare occasions, tiny coins or folded slips of paper. These offerings are not given out of fear, though that plays a part. They are gestures of gratitude, appeals for luck, for protection, for a better harvest, or, perhaps, to be left in peace. Some shrines are very old, others are newer, maintained by local families or neighborhood associations. But all of them seem to radiate a hush, the kind of silence that listens back. Now shift your gaze northward, into the mountains of China. Here, too, fox shrines exist, though more quietly. They are often found near graveyards or tucked away behind homes. In Taoist and folk traditions, fox spirits were believed to gain power with age, eventually achieving the ability to take human form. A fox of 50 could become a woman, a fox of 100, a scholar, a fox of 1,000, could ascend to heaven or become a demon. People built small altars, simple boxes, with incense sticks and red paper charms, not to worship the fox, exactly, but to manage its presence, to acknowledge the unseen. This relationship was never built on trust, it was built on respect. In some villages, people spoke of foxes possessing individuals, especially young women or lonely men, but rather than casting them out, rituals were held to soothe the spirit, to guide it gently away. At times, fox spirits were thought to linger in ancestral halls, or accompany the souls of the dead. Even today, in certain parts of East Asia, small temples to foxes still stand near burial sites, marking that liminal space between life and what lies beyond. It's worth noting that the fox, though often clever and seductive, is also deeply solitary. Perhaps that is part of its appeal. Unlike the great gods, with temples and priests, the fox spirit lingers at the edges. It does not demand belief. It simply waits. Under the eaves, in the rustle of reeds, in the corner of your eye, when you're not quite sure what you saw. So now, picture once more that quiet shrine beneath the cedar trees. The incense has burned low. A small plate of tofu rests beside a flickering lantern. Somewhere nearby, a fox watches, not hungry, not angry, simply watching. And now the night deepens. The wind stills. The offerings remain. Now, imagine yourself in a large walled compound, surrounded not by bricks, but by packed earth and timber. The morning mist has yet to rise. You can hear the soft clink of bronze vessels being arranged for a ritual, and the low murmur of voices, chanting in ancient tones. You are no longer among fox spirits or woodland paths. You are in the heart of one of China's earliest dynasties, the Shang, and life here is complicated. Here, everything is watched. Everything is weighed. Let us walk gently through this world, the world of nobles, priests, scribes, and kings, and see how their lives unfolded in quiet tension beneath the gaze of both ancestors and gods. The Shang dynasty ruled parts of northern China from around 1600 to 1046 BCE. It was a time before great stone palaces, but not before complexity. The capital, near present-day Yenyang, was a carefully organized hub of royal power. There were temples and shrines, workshops for jade and bronze, and deep pits filled with the remnants of ceremonies long past. But this was no glittering court like Versailles. Life here, even for the elite, was often anxious and ritual-bound. To live well in the Shang world was not to live extravagantly, but to live in accordance with expectation. Start with the king. His power was divine, or at least divinely approved. The Shang believed their rulers served as the chief mediator between the living and the dead. He consulted the ancestors. He made sacrifices. He cast oracle bones into fire and read their cracks, asking about weather, war, harvests, and health. Nothing was done casually. If the king wanted to build a new house, he asked. If the queen was sick, he asked. If it would rain during the spring hunt, he asked. And so, a quiet rhythm unfolded. Morning rituals, consultations, feasting at precise intervals. A daily life dictated by divination, not desire. Now consider the nobles around him, those with land, rank, or military status. They lived in timber houses built on rammed earth foundations, with thatched roofs and open courtyards. Their homes were airy in summer, cold in winter, and always oriented around social structure. Within these compounds, everything had its place. You woke with the sun. You bathed, if water was available. You donned hemp robes and bowed before altars, not merely in worship, but as part of the everyday structure of filial piety. Meals were modest but meaningful. Millet porridge, cooked meats, steamed greens, ceremonial wine brewed from rice or millet, was reserved for special occasions or court feasts. Even music, which was common at banquets, followed strict forms. Bells, chimes, and stringed instruments accompanied dances that were not joyous but reverent. Every movement had its precedent, every note its hierarchy. Among the most respected figures in the court were the diviners and scribes. They etched questions onto bones, usually ox scapulae or turtle shells, then heated them until they cracked. These cracks were interpreted, recorded, and stored in archives. It was part bureaucracy, part mysticism, and it is from these oracle bones that we know what they feared: bad harvests, enemy raids, childbirth complications, the disfavor of ancestors. There is a sense, reading their words, of quiet unease, not panic, but vigilance, the kind that never truly rests. Even joy was ritualized. Weddings, births, and royal promotions were all bound up in prescribed gestures. Gifts were exchanged, libations poured, but spontaneity was rare. Even among the elite, death loomed large. Burials were elaborate, especially for royalty. Tombs were dug deep, sometimes 10 to 15 meters, and lined with timber. Inside were goods for the afterlife: jade ornaments, bronze ritual vessels, weapons, and sometimes even sacrificed attendants. The tomb of Lady Fu Hao, a powerful consort and military leader, revealed over 400 bronze items, 600 jade artifacts, and dozens of sacrificed individuals, She was remembered not only for her power in life, but for her station in death. And so, life at court moved forward, not with luxury, but with deep awareness of order, of hierarchy, of the weight of the past. Now, picture yourself in that world once more. You are seated in a quiet courtyard. The sun is low. A scribe finishes etching a question into bone and nods toward the brazier dot in the next room. Someone plays a soft note on a stringed instrument. It echoes, and fades, and echoes again. This is not a loud history, but it is a long one, and it is filled with the soft, steady rhythms of reverence and routine. Let us now step away from the court, the mist, and the bones dot, and close our journey with one final thought. Conclusion. The slow echo of footsteps, and now the journey winds down. You have walked beside weary monks, through mountain passes, felt the unpredictable energy of a monkey with a golden staff, heard whispered prayers beside small fox shrines hidden beneath pine trees, and watched as court officials carefully etched questions into bone, hoping the spirits would answer kindly. History is often told as a grand sweep, empires rising, battles fought, kings crowned and dethroned, but in truth, it was mostly silence, waiting, repeating, walking, remembering. For every Sun Wukong with a thunderous leap, there were 10,000 ordinary steps taken in muddy sandals. For every cunning fox spirit slipping through moonlight, there were villagers, lighting lanterns, preparing bowls of rice, brushing dust from tiny wooden altars, and for every ruler clad in bronze and jade, there were servants and scribes, quietly observing, following routine, and trying not to be noticed. There is a rhythm to all of this, a pattern, a slow and ancient heartbeat. It reminds us that the past was not always bright or noble or exciting. Sometimes it was confusing or uncomfortable or simply long, but even in its strangeness, it holds something soothing, because people have always tried to understand the world, tried to survive each day, tried to leave something behind, even if it was just a cracked bone or a fox-shaped figurine buried in the earth. Tonight, as you lay still and the room darkens, you are not far from them. You may not wear hemp robes or sip millet wine beneath a bamboo roof, but you carry questions too, even if you don't throw them into fire. You seek comfort, peace, perhaps understanding, and here, in these old, quiet stories, you've found a place to rest, so let the echoes fade. Let the drums of the celestial armies go silent. Let the fox vanish back into the woods. You are warm, you are still, you are safe. Why it sucked to be a river dragon. Imagine yourself, not as a farmer, nor an emperor, but as something stranger, something immense, coiled beneath the surface of a green-brown river, a creature made of mist and thunder, a river dragon, long, horned, wise, and entirely at the mercy of human expectation. You are revered, in a way, but only when needed. Your name is etched into the wooden beams of a shrine that no one visits in fair weather. A rusted bell hangs from the eaves. It rings only when the drought tightens its grip, or when the river swells too high and too fast. Then suddenly, everyone remembers you. Priests arrive in hurried procession, sweat glistening on their brows. Villagers shuffle behind, clutching incense sticks, folding joss paper into careful shapes. They kneel, mutter, bow, beg, rain, O Dragon King, or no more rain, or please, not so much. Sometimes they blame you outright, not the officials who mismanaged the canals, not the farmers who stripped the hills of trees. No, it is the dragon who failed in his duty and duties. Oh, you had many. Each river had its own Dragon King. The Yellow River, the Yangtze, the way larger rivers had regional assistants, minor dragons, bureaucrats of water, bound to obey the celestial emperor's will. You were part deity, part civil servant, and when the water disobeyed, when fields flooded or fish vanished, the people did what they always did. They performed rituals, they recited ancient invocations, and sometimes they chained you. Yes. In some towns, when prayers failed, statues of you were dragged from your shrines and bound in iron. It was not meant to be symbolic. They would physically lock up a carved dragon figure in a wooden cage. Sometimes they submerged it. Sometimes it was left in the open, under sun or storm. It was a public accusation. You were not doing your job. It may seem odd, chaining a stone carving, but to the people, it mattered. The act itself was a form of protest, a quiet, ritualized anger. Yet, when the rains returned, when the river flowed just right, When rice seedlings greened in every field, you were thanked. A feast might be laid at your shrine. Lanterns floated on the water. Children splashed and laughed, but it never lasted. No one asked if the dragon was tired. No one wondered what it meant to serve endlessly, with no voice of your own. The rhythm of life around the river was one of constant hope and occasional panic. To be a river dragon was to be forever watched, forever asked, and rarely praised. You could not speak, but your silence was full of meaning. If the rains came, it was because of you. If they didn't, it was still because of you. Let us drift now, just a little deeper, past the outer coils of legend, and into a single story. One dragon king, one mistake, and a punishment that echoed across the clouds. The Jing River moves quietly now. It winds through central China, past farms and low hills, its waters rarely causing a stir in the modern world. But once, long ago, it was home to a story that echoed up toward heaven, and ended with thunder. The Dragon King of the Jing River was not known for wrath or pride. In the old tales, he was considered gentle, compassionate, a spirit of flowing generosity, and that, as it turned out, was a problem. Let us go back, not just in space, but in time. The Tang Dynasty, a golden age. Poets wrote in elegant brushstrokes. Merchants brought glass and saffron from the west. Temples stood in quiet harmony with the trees, but nature remained indifferent. Rivers flooded, crops withered, and the court, despite all its learning and splendor, still turned to the heavens for answers. Now, imagine you are the Dragon King of the Jing River. You were summoned, not by villagers this time, but by a celestial messenger, an edict from the Jade Emperor himself. You will send rain, exactly 3 inches, no more, no less. The command is precise, bureaucratic, unbending. But you see the land below. You see the fields parched and cracked. You see the desperate eyes of farmers watching their wells dry. You see children coughing in dust, oxen sinking to their knees, and you decide to help. You send a little more, just a bit, a generous downpour to ease the suffering, a kindness, a small rebellion. But the heavens do not take disobedience lightly. The story goes that the Jade Emperor, upon learning of the excess rain, was furious, and so an executioner was dispatched, a celestial official, heartless and meticulous. He was told, remove the Dragon King, do it swiftly, no questions. But before the blade fell, the Dragon King had a dream in it. He appeared to a human man, a scholar, seated at his desk. In candlelight, this man was no stranger to odd dreams. He was, in fact, the poet and mystic known as Han Shangzi, one of the legendary 8 immortals. The Dragon King whispered, "They mean to kill me. At the execution ground, at the hour of the snake, you must help." Han Shangzi awoke with the dream echoing like thunder in his ears. He tried, he pleaded with officials, he wrote scrolls, he consulted stars, but the execution took place, just as the dragon had feared, just as he had foretold. In some versions, Han Shangzi arrives moments too late, only to see the dragon's form dissipate into a mist, rising silently into the air, its spirit already judged. In others, the poet catches a glimpse of divine injustice, and vows to record it, and so the story was passed down, not just a fable about weather, but a warning about kindness, about rules, and the consequences of defying them, even for mercy's sake. It is a haunting tale, because, at its heart, it asks a question that still troubles even now. What happens when doing the right thing is the wrong thing to those in power? The Dragon King of the Jing River broke the rules to spare the people, and for it, he was erased. The rains, however, did come, and the people, though they never knew his full name, remembered him with offerings, left by the water's edge, a peach, a cup of wine, a single strand of incense. Now, the Jing flows quietly, but if you stand by its banks at twilight, you might imagine the coils of a long, shimmering tail just beneath the surface, still watching, still caring. We will now follow another ripple, a different path, not a story from myth, but something found in the earth itself. Cracked bones, burned edges, and carved questions that sought to pierce the future. Dragon bones, the truth behind oracle scripts. In a quiet museum room, dimly lit and carefully climate-controlled, lie fragments of bone, not large, not especially eye-catching, and yet they whisper. Imagine standing before one, a flat sliver of ox scapula, or perhaps the curved edge of a tortoise shell. The surface is etched with strange lines, vertical, deliberate, almost elegant. Some are barely visible, others are darkened by soot. A closer look reveals a language not quite familiar, ancient Chinese characters. Early and angular dot. These are oracle bones. They are not mythical, not carved by dragons, but for centuries they were believed to be. You see, in rural northern China, especially in the region of Enyang, villagers long found these bones buried in dry soil. Strange and ancient, cracked and blackened. They called them long Jew dragon bones. And, naturally, they ground them into powder. Why? For medicine, to treat fever, to relieve pain, to calm restless sleep. They were sold in a bundled with herbs, boiled into bitter tonics. No one suspected they were looking at the earliest known form of Chinese writing. Not until the late 1800s. It began with the scholar Wang Yirong who, while ill, visited a pharmacy in Beijing. He noticed odd markings on the bone pieces he was prescribed. Not random cracks, but symbols. Delicate lines scratched into a jawled bone. A language, long forgotten. From there, a slow unraveling began. These so-called dragon bones weren't the remains of mythical creatures. They were the ceremonial tools of Bronze Age diviners, used not for curing the body, but for questioning fate. Let us gently slip back, now into a royal court of the late Shang dynasty. Around 1200 BCE, the air is thick with incense. A turtle shell is placed on a fire-warmed stone slab. A priest holds a stylus. Nearby, a king waits, his face unreadable, his fingers pressed together in silent concern. A crack appears on the bone's underside, spidering outward. That's the answer. The diviner leans in. He begins to carve deliberate, calm strokes right next to the split. The question had been something like, will there be rain tomorrow? Should we launch a hunt? Will the queen's childbirth go well? Or, sometimes, will the river dragon be pleased this season? Over time, these inquiries formed a sort of chronicle, not a history as we know it, but a rhythm of royal concern. Weather, warfare, crops, dreams. Again and again, thousands of these bones were used, many buried, some burned, and many more forgotten. It is worth noting that the word for writing, in Chinese when originally referred to lines and patterns, much like the cracks on these bones, the written word was born from flame and fracture. The dragon, in this light, becomes not a creature of fire and flight, but of questions and quiet uncertainty. What was once mistaken for magical remains became, instead, a record of early thought, of fear, of hope, of kings reaching out to spirits for guidance, and of scribes dutifully recording their every plea. So the next time you hear the term dragon bone, you might think not of scales and smoke, but of a flat piece of shoulder, blade inked with forgotten longing. Let us move now from the palace and the priest, to a quieter place, one far from bronze cauldrons and formal rituals. A village, low mud walls, fields that flood too often, and families who know the river, not as myth, but as mood. Beside a wide river in early spring, the banks are still damp from melted snow upriver. The scent of silt and decaying vegetation hangs in the morning mist. Birds call to one another in the reeds, and the breeze is heavy, low, pressing against the earth with a quiet urgency. This is a floodplain. Here, life does not unfold in months or seasons, it unfolds in water levels. And for those who lived here, long ago in ancient China, near the Yellow River, or along the tributaries of the Yangtze, each day was marked by a low, patient kind of watchfulness. Would the rains come early this year? Would the levees hold? Would the gods listen? You wake before dawn. Your home is modest baked earth walls, a roof of thatch or tile if you're fortunate. The floor is packed dirt, smooth with years of footsteps. Outside, your neighbors are already at work. Children scoop mud to mold new bricks. Older villagers lay down bundles of dried grass reinforcement for a crumbling embankment. Everyone has a role, and no one is far from the water's edge. You don't go a day without checking the river. In some seasons, it retreats far from the banks, docile and silvery in the sun. In others, it creeps forward, slow at first. Then in the night, you wake to the sound of water lapping just beyond the threshold. Sandbags are prepared long before they're needed. They're stacked behind homes, near grain stores, beside the main road. Some are old and leaking. Some are fresh, damp with sweat from the hands that filled them. You are always listening. For the wind, for the shift in bird calls, for the crunch of urgent footsteps across the fields. There is a rhythm to this life, a kind of calm that's always just one step ahead of calamity. And above it all, behind it all, is the dragon. Not a dragon as we imagine today, not a serpentine creature with shining scales and clouds beneath its claws. No, the dragon of a floodplain villager was something less visible, but more constant. It was the spirit believed to live in the waters, the deity of the river itself, the one who brought rain when asked, and drowned entire harvests when displeased. Families left offerings at small shrines, a bowl of millet, a ribbon of red cloth, a whispered prayer at dusk. In temples farther away, priests performed full ceremonies, burning incense, chanting petitions. But in the village, most rituals were humble. You did not speak the dragon's name loudly. You did not take too much fish in one day. You watched for signs, ripples moving against the current, strange patterns in morning fog, unusual dreams. The dragon was there, always, sometimes sleeping beneath the surface, sometimes thrashing invisibly. When the floods came, as they often did, it was not sudden. The river rose in stages. The earth softened under your feet. The oxen pulled carts through soggy ground. People moved their sleeping mats to higher ground, out of panic, but as part of a routine, because flood was not a surprise, it was a certainty. Children grew up learning which trees marked safe water levels, which birds left first, which sounds in the night meant the levee had been breached. After a flood, the village was quiet, not ruined, but worn down. The mud dried in wide cracks across the road. The harvest was thinner, tools lost, homes patched hastily, but life continued. The people rebuilt, the river calmed, and the dragon, it slept again. That was the cycle. Risk, ritual, resilience. In the distant cities, where officials read reports and issued orders, the river was a map, problem lines on parchment. But here, in the floodplain, it was a living presence, something with moods and memory. You might never see a dragon, but you lived in its breath. Conclusion of scales and stillness, water, worship, and waiting. And so, we find ourselves at the end of the river's long winding path, from stormy heavens to whispered dreams beside the hearth, from grand temples echoing with prayers to quiet villagers bracing beneath the sky. We've traced the elusive shape of the Chinese river dragon not only as a symbol of weather or whim, but as a reflection of the people who lived alongside it. These dragons, they were creatures of reverence, of caution, loved, feared, petitioned, and blamed. They were, in a way, a mirror of our need to explain the forces we cannot control, of the longing to assign will to water, to believe that the storm listened, to imagine that mercy might fall like gentle rain, if only we asked the right way. And even when the dragons slept, their absence had weight. You can still feel it now, can't you? The rhythm of a life, measured not by clocks, but by ripples. The anxiety of watching clouds gather on the horizon. The comfort of a ritual passed down across centuries. A bowl of rice left on a windowsill. A mother's story murmured in a darkened room of a dragon who once smiled on her village and turned the floods away. Now, here in the present, far from those fields and banks, far from the creaking levees and damp sandals, you rest. The dragons are quiet. The waters are still. The world outside your window may be far removed from red mats and oracle bones, but the quiet logic of ritual endures. The way we light candles, check the weather, speak small hopes aloud in the dark. These are the echoes of older patterns, and in remembering them, gently, without rush, we draw closer to the rhythm of those who came before, closer to the hush of a dragon's breath, curling through mist. So close your eyes now, if you haven't already. Let the imagined scent of river air drift away. Let the steady pulse of ancient stories settle into silence. You are safe, you are warm, and the dragons, if they're watching, are doing so from a distance, quiet, patient, at peace. Until next time, sleep well.